I woke up to the sound of glass rattling faintly in the living room. At first, I thought it was the wind against the window panes, but then I heard something that made my skin crawl, a grunt, followed by the squeak of sneakers trying to get traction on wood. My son Leo, only 13, had been up late coding in his room, and before I could even swing my legs out of bed, the shrill scream of the alarm system shattered the silence. A motion-triggered siren wailed through the house, so loud it made my teeth ache, and over it I heard a distinctly human yelp, the kind of sound a person makes when they've just realized they've made a colossal mistake. I rushed into the hallway and found Leo at the control panel, wide-eyed but calm, his fingers already tapping the emergency code to keep the alarm blaring while the system automatically dialed dispatch. The kid had drilled this with me more times than I'd care to admit. He loved tech, loved systems, and apparently loved being prepared for entitled intrusions. And that's when I saw it, through the dim light spilling from the porch lamp, a figure awkwardly halfway through my living room window, one leg dangling inside, the rest of her body still struggling through. My brain did a double take before it registered. It was Karen. HOA Karen. Now, most sane people knock on the door if they want to talk to a neighbor. Not Karen. She'd spent months making my life miserable, letters about my grass length, lectures about my non-standard mailbox, fines for things she invented on the spot. But this? Crawling through my actual window in the middle of the night? That was a new frontier even for her. I stood there frozen just long enough for the scene to become comical. Her sweater had snagged on the frame, so her torso was stuck while her legs flailed helplessly outside. She was grunting, huffing, muttering curses, as if my house were some kind of jungle gym she was entitled to conquer. The alarm shrieked, my kid stood ready with his phone in one hand and the emergency flashlight in the other, and I couldn't help it. I started laughing. It wasn't a polite laugh, either. It was the kind of half-panicked, half-hysterical laugh that erupts when reality bends too far. Karen whipped her head toward me, her face blotchy and furious, hair wild from the effort. "This is an HOA inspection," she shouted over the alarm, as if that explained everything. "You're harboring violations." "Violations?" I yelled back, clutching the wall for balance. "Karen, you just broke into my house." Leo, bless his heart, clicked his flashlight on and beamed it directly into her face like he was conducting an interrogation. She squawked and threw up an arm to shield her eyes, still dangling halfway in and halfway out. My son looked at me and deadpanned. "Dad, do I let the system lock her in?" That got Karen's attention. She froze, then tried to wriggle backward, but her sweater was too tightly snagged. The alarm's voice module announced, "Police en route in 3 minutes," and she lost whatever composure she had left. She started screaming about trespass laws, about citizens' rights, about how she was acting in an official capacity as HOA vice president. The irony of her yelling "trespass" while literally stuck in my window nearly made me double over. I finally regained enough breath to speak clearly. "Karen, you've officially lost it. You've tried letters, fines, screaming matches at board meetings, and now you're breaking and entering. Do you realize the kind of charges you're stacking against yourself right now?" She tried to spit back something about community safety, but the wail of the alarm drowned her out. Leo leaned casually against the wall, as though he were watching a late-night comedy special, and said, "Dad, I bet she's going to blame us when the cops arrive." And that was the hook. The realization that this wasn't just another HOA scuffle. This was about to turn into something so much bigger, because Karen wasn't the type to back down even when the ground had collapsed under her. She wasn't crawling through my window because she wanted to chat. She was escalating, pushing boundaries the way only someone obsessed with control could, and she was about to drag my entire family into the wildest fight we'd ever faced. The siren kept screaming, Karen kept thrashing, and my kid kept grinning. And me? I knew, right then, that our lives in this HOA neighborhood were about to spin off the rails into chaos I couldn't yet imagine, but part of me almost welcomed it. By the time the police cruiser rolled into our cul-de-sac, the neighborhood had turned into a stage play. The alarm was still blaring, though Leo had lowered the volume so it wouldn't rupture our eardrums, and Karen was half inside my house, still tangled like a human cork in the window frame. Her face was beet red, whether from rage, embarrassment, or lack of oxygen I couldn't tell. A couple of neighbors had peeked out from their blinds, phones recording the chaos, because of course no one in an HOA neighborhood misses the chance to film the downfall of their self-appointed queen. The cruiser's headlights cut across the lawn, and 2 officers stepped out. One was young, maybe fresh from academy training, and his wide-eyed stare said he hadn't been briefed on the concept of HOA drama. The other was older, shoulders slouched, with the weary expression of someone who'd seen every flavor of suburban insanity and wanted nothing more than to retire to a cabin in Montana. They both stopped dead at the sight of Karen stuck in my window, legs flailing like some tragic attempt at modern art. "What in the hell?" the older officer muttered, then caught himself and barked, "Ma'am, step out of the window immediately." Karen, with the confidence of a dictator in decline, puffed up her chest and shouted, "Officers, thank God you're here. This man has been hoarding violations, hazards to the entire community. I am acting as HOA vice president, and I demand you arrest him at once for obstruction." I swear, for a split second the younger cop looked like he almost believed her. But then Leo tilted his flashlight toward the security camera mounted above the window, its little red light blinking steadily, recording everything. I added, loud enough for the whole street to hear, "Funny how obstruction works, considering she's literally obstructing my window while breaking and entering." The older officer sighed, pinched the bridge of his nose, and stepped forward. "Ma'am, you're trespassing. Step out now, or we'll remove you." But Karen, never one to accept reality without a fight, screamed, "You can't remove me from my own community inspection. This home has been non-compliant for months." She yanked backward, finally tearing her sweater free with an ugly ripping sound, and tumbled onto the lawn. The younger officer instinctively reached down to help her up, but she slapped his hand away and spun toward me like a rabid raccoon. "You think you're clever? You think your little alarm stunt makes you safe? I'll have the HOA board convene an emergency meeting tomorrow. You'll regret humiliating me like this." The older cop didn't flinch. He simply said, "Ma'am, I'll need your ID." The street went pin-drop silent. Karen sputtered, shifted, then tried to regain her footing. "My ID? I don't need to show you anything. This man should be the one in handcuffs. He's dangerous. Look at that fence he built, completely outside the guidelines. His mailbox doesn't match. His kid has been flying drones over properties without clearance." She was practically foaming at the mouth, pulling every minor grievance she could weaponize. The younger officer glanced at me, clearly uncertain, so I calmly held up my phone. "Everything she just accused me of has already been dismissed in HOA hearings. And by the way, officer, I have every second of tonight on 3 different cameras, plus the alarm system footage. Would you like me to send it to your precinct email?" The older cop gave me a tired nod. "Do that." Then to Karen, "Ma'am, ID. Now." And then came the twist. Karen, red-faced and trembling, spat, "You'll hear from my lawyer." And instead of producing an ID, she stormed toward her car, a shiny Lexus parked crookedly across 2 driveways. The officers shouted after her, but she yanked open the door, threw herself inside, and peeled out so fast the tires screeched. The cruiser's lights flashed instantly, but the officers didn't even bother chasing. The older one just muttered, "Not worth the paperwork tonight." Leo leaned against the doorframe, smirking. "So, does she get charged with breaking and entering, or does HOA privilege give her a free pass?" I didn't laugh, because as funny as the scene had been, I knew Karen. If she was willing to risk crawling through my window, she was desperate. And desperate people don't retreat, they regroup. The officers took my statement, asked Leo a few questions, and confirmed the footage I'd promised to send. The younger one seemed almost apologetic, like he knew they weren't going to cuff Karen that night, even though she deserved it. The older one looked me square in the eye and said, "Keep your system armed. People like her, sometimes they don't take a hint." Then they left, lights fading into the night. When the house was quiet again, Leo sat at the kitchen table scrolling through the alarm app on his phone, replaying Karen's graceless crawl frame by frame, laughing every few seconds. I poured myself a stiff drink and stared out the window she'd tried to invade. That was no longer just an HOA squabble. That was war footing. And sure enough, the next morning confirmed it. I woke to find 3 HOA notices taped to my door, each one typed hastily and signed in Karen's unmistakable, aggressive handwriting. One fined me for unauthorized alarm disturbances. Another accused me of harboring aggressive minors, a jab at Leo, I guess. The third? A formal declaration of intent, an emergency HOA board meeting scheduled for that very evening, subject line screaming in bold, community safety violations. Leo saw the papers and snorted. "She wrote these at 3 a.m., didn't she?" "Yeah," I muttered, stuffing them in a drawer. "And tonight, she's going to try and bury us in front of the whole board." But she wasn't going to get the last word. Not this time. I pulled up my laptop, queued up the security footage, and began planning. Karen had escalated to breaking into my home. If she wanted a war, I'd bring the receipts to the entire HOA, and watch her empire crumble in front of her loyal subjects. What I didn't realize then was just how far she was willing to take it. By that night, when I walked into the HOA clubhouse with Leo by my side and the footage ready on a flash drive, Karen wasn't just prepared to spin the narrative. She was prepared to weaponize the entire neighborhood against me. And as the meeting began, packed tighter than I'd ever seen, I caught the gleam in her eye. She wasn't humiliated by last night. She was emboldened. That's when I realized this wasn't just about my house anymore. This was about her power, and she'd rather burn the entire neighborhood to ash than let it slip away. By the time I stepped into the HOA clubhouse that evening, it felt less like a neighborhood meeting and more like the opening act of a trial. Every folding chair was filled, neighbors packed shoulder to shoulder, murmuring in clusters. Some had their phones out already, waiting to record what they clearly expected to be a spectacle. At the front of the room, Karen perched behind the board's plastic folding table like a queen on a very cheap throne. Her posture was rigid, her chin high, and her eyes locked on me with a gleam that said she'd spent the entire day rehearsing her lines. Leo nudged me as we took our seat. "She stacked the room," he whispered. And he was right. Karen had roped in her loyalists, the same folks who believed every rumor she spun, who nodded along to her crusades about mailbox uniformity and lawn height. I saw them seated strategically, front row, whispering like sycophants at a royal court. The meeting began with the usual hollow pleasantries, but Karen didn't waste time. She slammed a stack of papers onto the table so hard that the microphone screeched. "Neighbors," she declared, "last night's disturbance proves beyond doubt what I have been saying for months. This household," she jabbed a finger toward me, "is a danger to our community." Gasps rippled across the room, but I noticed just as many eyes rolling. Eleanor, my 80-year-old neighbor who spent her evenings knitting by her window, looked at me and mouthed, "Drama queen." I bit back a grin. Karen waved a paper like it was a sacred decree. At approximately 11:37 p.m., my community patrol duties led me to inspect this property. What did I find? Unauthorized surveillance equipment. An alarm system so disruptive it shattered the peace of our entire street. And a hostile minor threatening to lock me in against my will. Leo let out a short laugh. Everyone turned. He didn't flinch. "You crawled through our window," he said flatly. "It's on video." That stirred the pot. Some neighbors gasped again, this time directed at her. Karen's face flushed crimson. "That footage is manipulated," she snapped too quickly. "This man and his son are tech junkies. They fabricate evidence. I was acting under HOA authority. That was my cue. Calmly, I stood and walked to the projector the HOA used for their sad little budget presentations. Funny you should say that, Karen, I said, plugging in my flash drive. Because I brought the raw feed. The screen flickered, and there it was. Karen, huffing and puffing, her torso jammed through my window while the alarm blared. Her shrieks played through the speakers, tinny but unmistakable. The room erupted, some neighbors covering their mouths to hide laughter, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Eleanor laughed so hard she dropped her knitting needles. Karen leapt to her feet. This is out of context. He set me up. The board president, a man named Gerald who normally avoided conflict like it was contagious, raised a hand. Karen, this looks pretty bad. Bad? Bad? She shrieked. You think this is bad? You're all blind. This man has been undermining our rules for months. His mailbox is a disgrace. His lawn, look at his lawn. And now his child has weaponized technology against me. Leo muttered, just loud enough for the mic to catch it. Weaponized? Lady, it's literally a Ring camera. The room broke into laughter. Karen's composure cracked. She slammed both fists on the table, eyes blazing. If you don't vote to fine him, to evict him, to protect this neighborhood from his chaos, then this entire community will collapse into lawlessness. The room went silent for a beat, and then Gerald cleared his throat. Karen, we can't evict a homeowner over a mailbox. And breaking into his home. But before he could finish, Karen pulled out her trump card. She held up a thick envelope, the kind lawyers love. Fine. If this board won't act, I already have. I've filed a lawsuit against him for harassment, obstruction, and emotional distress. And if you all don't stand with me, I'll sue the HOA as well for dereliction of duty. That was the twist. A collective groan rolled across the room. Suing the HOA meant every homeowner would get dragged into legal fees. Suddenly, the neighbors who'd been giggling at her theatrics weren't laughing anymore. Some turned to glare at me, as though I had conjured this storm just by existing. Others muttered angrily under their breath at her for dragging the whole community into her vendetta. Gerald rubbed his temples. Karen, suing everyone is not a solution. But Karen doubled down. It is the only solution. Either this man is punished, or I will see every one of you in court. That's when Eleanor stood, her knitting bag slung over her shoulder like a weapon. Oh, shut it, Karen. You broke into his house, and now you want us to pay for your tantrum? You've lost your mind. Her voice, sharp as a whip, cut through the noise. A cheer went up from the back row. Karen faltered for the first time, but then she spotted an opening. She pointed at me. If you had nothing to hide, why did your alarm target me? Why was your son waiting by the panel like he knew I was coming? The room shifted again. Doubt crept in. She was planting the idea that I had baited her. That I'd orchestrated the entire fiasco. And in that moment I saw the dangerous brilliance of Karen. Her ability to twist even her own downfall into suspicion against her opponent. I kept my cool. Because my kid was up coding at midnight. Because we have an alarm like every sane family in America. Because you crawled through my window like a burglar. That's it. But I could feel the tension in the room. This wasn't going to end tonight. Karen had escalated the battlefield from neighborhood politics to legal warfare, and now everyone was caught in the blast radius. The board finally adjourned the meeting, Gerald practically begging Karen to drop her lawsuit threats. She stormed out, her Lexus roaring like a war chariot. Neighbors clustered, some coming to me with sympathy, others shooting me cold looks as if I'd invited the chaos. Leo walked beside me out into the night air. She's not gonna stop, he said. No, I agreed, staring at the taillights disappearing down the street. She's going to burn everything down if she has to. What neither of us knew then was that she already had another move prepared. That envelope wasn't the end of her arsenal, it was the beginning. The very next day, a certified letter would land in my mailbox. Not just from her, but from an attorney with a reputation for dragging cases out for years. And attached to it would be something far more dangerous than fines or threats. A petition signed by over a dozen neighbors, demanding my removal from the HOA entirely. Karen wasn't trying to win a battle anymore. She was planning to erase me from the board, the neighborhood, and maybe even the property itself. And as I stood under the clubhouse lights, neighbors' whispers echoing around me, I realized I had underestimated her. She wasn't just entitled. She was willing to gamble the entire neighborhood's stability just to keep control. That night, the war officially changed front. And it was only going to get uglier. The certified letter arrived the next morning like a grenade dropped on my doorstep. I knew it was trouble before I even tore the envelope open. Thick cardstock, embossed seal, the whole package screamed billable hours. Leo hovered nearby, chewing on toast, watching my face as I unfolded the pages. It was exactly what I'd feared. A cease and desist order drafted by Karen's attorney, accusing me of harassment, defamation, and intimidation. Attached were photocopied signatures from 14 of my neighbors, all demanding the board call an emergency vote to expel me from the HOA entirely. The language was heavy-handed, the kind of legal jargon meant to intimidate, but what caught me wasn't the bluster, it was the signatures. Some names I expected, Karen's loyalists, but others people I'd shared block parties with, folks who had borrowed my tools, neighbors I thought were sensible. Seeing their names beneath that petition made my chest tighten. Leo leaned over my shoulder. Half of these people don't even like Karen. Fear, I muttered. She's scaring them into compliance. Before I could dwell, my phone buzzed. It was Eleanor. She never called, only knocked on doors. I answered, and her voice came sharp through the line. You got it, didn't you? The letter? Yeah. They've been canvassing since dawn. Karen's got a lawyer sniffing around the neighborhood, telling everyone you're a threat to property values. Scared old fools are signing just to make her go away. I sighed. Eleanor, 14 signatures is enough to force a board vote. She's not bluffing. Then you fight harder, she said. And don't worry, you're not alone. That was the first twist of the day. Because as soon as Eleanor hung up, I saw the second one. Karen herself, strutting down the sidewalk in broad daylight, flanked by her lawyer. He was a slick-looking man in a navy suit far too polished for our cul-de-sac, briefcase gleaming like a weapon. They went door to door, shaking hands, handing out glossy flyers that screamed, "Community Safety First," with my address plastered beneath it like a wanted poster. Leo, watching from the upstairs window, said, "Dad, she's running a political campaign." And he was right. Karen wasn't just targeting me. She was staging a full-on smear crusade. By noon, 3 more neighbors had taped signs to their lawns. Support HOA safety. Vote yes to remove. The words weren't subtle, and neither was the implication. That afternoon, Gerald from the board called me, his voice trembling. "Look, I don't want to take sides, but we're getting hammered with calls. Karen's attorney is threatening to sue us individually if we don't hold the vote by Friday. So you're caving. I'm complying with procedure. You can present your side at the meeting, of course." "Generous," I said, sarcasm dripping. Leo was pacing by then, muttering about setting up a neighborhood livestream, exposing Karen's antics online. I shook my head. Not yet. We don't win by shouting louder. We win by cutting through her story with the truth. Still, as evening fell, the anxiety clawed at me. Karen had momentum, and momentum, even built on lies, can crush anyone if left unchecked. The next day brought the next escalation. As I walked to retrieve the mail, I froze. My lawn was covered in bright orange stakes, each one hammered into the soil with little plastic flags fluttering. At first I thought it was a prank, until I saw the wording printed in bold. Unsafe property, condemnation recommended. Karen had hired some fake inspector. Or maybe her lawyer conjured the paperwork. Either way, the implication was brutal. That my property was unsafe, that I was endangering the neighborhood. A crowd of neighbors had gathered at the end of my driveway, whispering, gawking like it was a circus act. I pulled one of the flags out of the ground and held it up. These aren't real. The county never issued this. Karen's voice, shrill and triumphant, carried across the street. Don't listen to him. He's hiding structural dangers. His alarm system nearly injured me, and his house wiring is a fire hazard. I've secured preliminary condemnation orders. We cannot risk our families. Neighbors gasped, some muttering angrily at me, others shaking their heads at her. One brave man asked, "Karen, where's your proof?" She flourished a folder, stuffed with papers, seals, and stamps that looked official enough to fool anyone glancing from 10 feet away. Her lawyer stood at her side, silent but imposing, as though his presence validated every word she spewed. That was when Eleanor marched forward, her cane tapping like a drumbeat. She yanked one of the flags from the ground, examined it, and laughed so loudly it echoed. "This isn't county-issued," she announced. "This is clip art printed on neon paper. Karen, you've sunk to counterfeiting now?" The crowd buzzed. Karen's face twisted, but she doubled down. "It's preliminary," she barked. "The full orders are coming." I felt heat rush to my face. Enough was enough. I pulled my phone out, scrolled to my county inspector's number, and hit speakerphone right there in front of everyone. "Hey Jim? Quick question. Did your office condemn my property?" Jim laughed. "What? No. We haven't issued anything in your area for months." "Why?" I turned the volume up so the crowd heard every word. "Because someone just plastered my lawn with fake flags saying you did." Jim cursed. "That's fraud. Whoever's behind it could face serious charges." The crowd erupted again. Some glared daggers at Karen. Others pulled out their phones, snapping photos of the flags, muttering about evidence. Karen, cornered, shrieked, "He set this up. He's staging this to make me look bad." But her voice cracked with desperation, and the lawyer beside her finally put a hand on her arm, murmuring something low. That night, though, the real bomb dropped. I was sitting at the kitchen table when my email pinged with an anonymous message. No subject line, no sender name, just a PDF attachment. Against my better judgment, I opened it. Inside were scans of internal HOA communications, emails between Karen and 2 board members. They weren't just gossiping about me. They were plotting. Explicit lines about forcing him into foreclosure, about bankrupting him with legal fees until he sells. Even mention of using his kids' drones as evidence of surveillance violations. Leo, reading over my shoulder, whispered, "She's trying to destroy us financially." And that was when the anger shifted. Up until now, I'd been playing defense, swatting down her lies one by one. But with that file in my hands, I had the kind of ammunition she couldn't laugh off. The only question was, who sent it? Someone inside the board had turned on her. Someone wanted me to fight back. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, listening to Leo tapping furiously on his laptop as he began archiving every piece of evidence we had. My house had turned into a war room, our dining table stacked with papers, flash drives, screenshots, and now leaked emails. And I realized something unsettling. Karen wasn't just fighting me anymore. She was fighting to control everyone, to maintain her throne no matter the cost. If she succeeded, no one in the neighborhood would ever be safe from her tyranny. But if she failed, if I could expose her scheme publicly, with hard proof, then the empire she'd built on fear and manipulation would collapse overnight. The 3 days leading up to the vote stretched like an eternity, every sunrise delivering a new ambush from Karen. It was as if she'd set her alarm to wake up and think, how can I make his life miserable before breakfast? On the first morning, I stepped outside to find my trash cans tipped over and their contents strewn across the lawn. The stink of old leftovers hit me like a slap. Neighbors stood on their porches, watching. Karen, of course, appeared moments later, clutching a clipboard. Another sanitation violation, she called smugly, scribbling notes as though she'd caught me red-handed committing some heinous crime. I didn't give her the satisfaction of a response. Instead, Leo filmed the entire scene from his bedroom window, capturing her smirk, her theatrics, the exaggerated note-taking. We added it to our growing digital archive, Karen's meltdown files. The second day, a tow truck showed up at dawn, driver waving paperwork that claimed my vehicle was parked illegally. Order came from the HOA, he explained apologetically. I stood my ground until he radioed his dispatch and confirmed the request had come from a concerned resident, rather than any official board directive. By then, half the block had gathered, filming. Eleanor crossed her arms and shouted, "Karen, you're going to jail for fraud." The driver peeled off, clearly not wanting to get involved in a suburban war zone. By the third day, Karen escalated to what I can only describe as psychological warfare. I found flyers stuffed into my mailbox, taped to my door, even slipped under my windshield wipers. Each one was a cheaply printed manifesto declaring me a menace to the neighborhood and urging everyone to vote yes to remove the threat. The language was melodramatic enough to make a soap opera blush. One flyer even claimed I was harboring dangerous wildlife because of the time a stray goat wandered into my yard last spring. But beneath the noise, momentum was shifting. Thanks to the leaked emails, which I'd quietly shared with a handful of skeptical neighbors, cracks were forming in Karen's army. Eleanor had become my fiercest ally, parading around the block with copies of the damning exchanges, showing anyone who would listen. "She's plotting to bankrupt him. You're next if you cross her." Eleanor's voice carried, sharp as ever, and more than a few neighbors began peeling those support HOA safety signs off their lawns. The night before the vote, Leo and I transformed the dining room into a war command center. He arranged the video clips, the fake condemnation flags, the towing paperwork, and the leaked emails into a seamless presentation. "You have to go nuclear," he said, his tone calm but firm. "She's counting on shouting louder. You hit her with receipts she can't shout over." I studied the files, the mountain of evidence. "Once we do this, it's scorched earth. No going back." "Dad," Leo said, leaning forward, "she crawled through our window. She declared war first." He wasn't wrong. The following evening, the clubhouse brimmed with tension. The crowd was larger than ever. Neighbors who normally skipped meetings now packed the back rows, clutching folding chairs from home. The air buzzed with gossip. On one side, Karen's supporters clustered like soldiers awaiting orders. On the other, skeptics whispered, eyes darting nervously toward me. Karen strutted to the front, her lawyer trailing like a shadow. She radiated confidence, dressed in a blazer so bright it practically screamed power. She leaned into the microphone and began, "We gather tonight to protect our community from one homeowner's recklessness. His surveillance, his hostility, his violations endanger us all. The petition speaks for itself." I stood before she could continue, sliding my flash drive into the projector. "Before any vote, the community deserves to see the truth." The screen lit up, and the first clip rolled. Karen wriggling through my window, her voice shrill as the alarm blared. The room erupted, gasps, laughter, whispers. Karen's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. She pounded the table. "Fake!" she shouted. Then came the second clip. The tow truck driver, visibly annoyed, explaining that the order came from a concerned resident. Eleanor's voice rang out in the background, calling Karen out. Murmurs of anger rippled through the crowd. Next, a slideshow of the condemnation flags, followed by the live call with the county inspector. His words echoed, "That's fraud. Whoever's behind it could face serious charges." The weight of those words settled heavy over the room. Karen's face flushed crimson. She tried to speak, but I wasn't done. I opened the final file, the leaked emails. The text filled the screen, line after damning line. Force him into foreclosure. Bankrupt him with fees. Target the kids' drones. The words might as well have been dynamite. The crowd erupted in shouts and disbelief. Karen lunged for the microphone. "This is doctored. He fabricated these. He's manipulating you all with lies." but her own allies were shifting uncomfortably, whispering to one another. One board member, the same one who'd signed the petition, stood up and barked, "Karen, did you really write this?" His voice cracked with panic. Karen froze. For the first time, her mask slipped. Her lips parted, her eyes darted, searching for an escape. And then, in a move so brazen it almost impressed me, she shouted, "He hacked my email! This is criminal!" The room broke into chaos. Neighbors shouted over one another, some demanding her resignation, others confused and angry, a few still clinging to her side. Gerald, the beleaguered board president, slammed a gavel against the table, his voice cracking. "Order! Order!" Finally, when the noise subsided, Gerald spoke. "Enough. We've all seen the evidence. This isn't about a mailbox anymore. This is about trust. And I, for one, can't trust a vice president who breaks into homes and plots against neighbors." Applause erupted. Eleanor let out a triumphant whoop, waving her cane like a baton. Leo grinned, whispering, "She's finished." But Karen wasn't going quietly. She grabbed the microphone with both hands, her voice shrill and trembling. "You fools! Don't you see? He's tricked you all. If you side with him, you'll regret it. I'll sue every single one of you." Her lawyer, pale and sweating, tried to pull her back, murmuring urgently. But Karen ripped free, her voice cracking into hysteria. "This neighborhood is mine. Without me, you're nothing but weeds and chaos." And that's when the twist landed. From the back of the room, a tall figure rose. A man in a crisp suit, flanked by two deputies. He held up a badge. "County Sheriff's Office," he announced. "We've received multiple complaints of harassment, trespassing, and fraud. And after reviewing this evidence," he nodded at the projector, "we're placing Ms. Karen under arrest." The room exploded into cheers, gasps, and stunned silence. Karen's scream of outrage echoed against the walls as the deputies moved forward, her lawyer stumbling after them in protest. She thrashed, shrieked about conspiracies, about betrayal, but the deputies were unmoved. They cuffed her right there in front of everyone. Leo grinned from ear to ear. Eleanor shouted, "Justice at last." And I stood still, heart pounding, watching the queen of the HOA dragged away in disgrace. The clubhouse still smelled faintly of Karen's perfume and rage when the deputies hauled her out, but the tension didn't vanish with her. In fact, it only sharpened. Neighbors muttered in tight clusters, some jubilant, others uneasy. The glow of vindication was strong, but underneath it lurked something colder: fear. Because if Karen had been bold enough to crawl through my window, falsify documents, and orchestrate smear campaigns, who else had been complicit? Eleanor leaned on her cane beside me, grinning like she'd just watched her favorite soap opera deliver its most dramatic cliffhanger. "That's one chapter closed," she said. "But don't you think for a second that snake doesn't have eggs hidden all over this neighborhood?" Leo nodded grimly. "She wasn't working alone. Those emails mentioned 2 board members." That was the thought I couldn't shake as the crowd thinned. Karen had been arrested, yes, but the machinery she'd built, the fear, the manipulation, the willingness to weaponize the HOA, wasn't dismantled yet. It was humming quietly, waiting for the next person to grab the controls. The next morning, the headlines arrived faster than coffee. Local news stations had picked up the story of HOA vice president arrested for fraud and trespassing. Reporters parked their vans near the clubhouse, interviewing gawking neighbors. Suddenly our quiet cul-de-sac was national fodder for every morning show that loved a good suburban meltdown. My face even made the news when one station aired the footage of me calling the county inspector on speakerphone. Leo found it hilarious. "You're a meme now, Dad. Look." He showed me a post already circulating online. A freeze frame of me holding up the fake condemnation flag with the caption, "This ain't county issued, Karen." Thousands of shares. But the attention had consequences. By noon, my email was flooded with journalists begging for interviews, law firms offering consultations, and trolls spamming me with HOA sucks memes. At the same time, 3 anonymous messages landed in my inbox. Angry, threatening. You'll regret this, Karen will win, you're not safe. I deleted the first 2. The third I forwarded to the deputies. That evening, Gerald called a recovery meeting at the clubhouse. Without Karen, the board looked deflated, shuffling papers nervously like children left alone without a teacher. Gerald cleared his throat. Neighbors, this is an unfortunate moment. But we must continue the work of the HOA. We'll appoint an interim vice president until Karen's situation is resolved. The words hung heavy. Until Karen's situation is resolved. Not since Karen is gone, not given her crimes. No, he left the door open. And I realized Gerald wasn't weak, he was scared. Scared that Karen would claw her way back, scared of picking the wrong side. Before anyone else could speak, Eleanor slammed her cane on the floor. Resolved? She broke into his house and forged county documents. There's nothing to resolve, she's finished. But then came the twist. One of the board members, Diane, a quiet woman who rarely spoke, rose from her seat. She looked pale, her hands shaking as she clutched a folder. With all due respect, Eleanor, she said softly, Karen had influence. She wasn't alone. The room hushed. Diane opened the folder, revealing more emails, more documents. She had 2 board members helping her draft notices, backdating fines, creating illusions of consensus. She glanced nervously at Gerald. Some of us signed under pressure. Threats, even. She said if we didn't back her, she'd ruin us financially. Gerald's face drained of color. A ripple of shock spread through the room. Names, Eleanor demanded. Diane hesitated, then whispered, Gerald. And Tom. The silence that followed was suffocating. Gerald stammered, this is absurd. She manipulated everyone. But his hands trembled and Tom, the treasurer, stared at the floor like a child caught stealing candy. Leo leaned close to me. Dad. This is it. This is the rot. Neighbors erupted, shouting questions, accusations, betrayal. Gerald tried to gavel the noise down, but it was useless. Finally I stood. You all wanted the truth. Here it is. Karen wasn't the disease. She was the symptom. The real sickness is letting fear and greed run this neighborhood. Either we clean house now, or we'll be dealing with another Karen before the week is out. Applause thundered from half the room, boos from the other half. The split was clear. The board adjourned in chaos, but that night my suspicions hardened. Karen might have been behind bars, but she still had allies. Gerald and Tom were exposed, but what about the signatures on that petition? What about the threats in my inbox? The war hadn't ended, it had gone underground. The next morning proved it. As I stepped outside, I froze. My window, the same one Karen had crawled through, was shattered again. But this time, no one was stuck halfway. The glass lay scattered on the floor, and a single sheet of paper rested on the sill. 4 words scrawled in black marker, "You're not done yet." I locked eyes with Leo as he came running. "Karen?" he asked. I shook my head slowly. "No. This is someone else." Eleanor arrived minutes later, eyes blazing, cane tapping like a war drum. "She's pulling strings from jail. Or her cronies are." And that's when I realized the next twist. Karen's arrest hadn't broken her. It had made her a martyr to the people who feared losing their grip. She was rallying support even from a cell, painting herself as a victim of my smear campaign. By the end of the day, social media groups I'd never heard of were buzzing. Posts screamed that Karen was wrongfully imprisoned, that she was saving the neighborhood from corruption. Hashtags trended. A GoFundMe popped up for her legal fees. And the donors? Some of them were my own neighbors. Leo slammed his laptop shut. "Dad, she's building an army online." I stared at the broken window, at the paper with its chilling message, and I knew Chapter 1 of this war had ended, but Chapter 2 was only beginning. Karen might be caged, but her influence was multiplying, mutating. And the next battle wouldn't be fought in the clubhouse. It would be fought everywhere, online, in courtrooms, in the hearts of neighbors torn between truth and fear. As night fell, I replaced the shattered glass with plywood, my reflection fractured in the shards on the floor. Leo taped the note to our evidence wall beside the emails, the flags, the flyers. "This isn't just about Karen anymore," I said quietly. "It's about whether this neighborhood chooses control or freedom." Eleanor's eyes narrowed, sharp and fierce. "Then we'd better make sure they choose right." But deep inside, I knew the storm had only just begun. The plywood covering my window was barely nailed in before the next wave of chaos hit. Karen might have been behind bars, but she was far from silent. From jail, she'd somehow secured phone calls, emails, even public statements. Within 48 hours, she was on the evening news, framed as a misunderstood neighborhood leader wrongfully accused of overstepping her duties. Her lawyer, slick as ever, stood on the courthouse steps, spouting lines about a father who orchestrated a smear campaign to cover up his violations. Watching it on TV, I felt my stomach knot. Not because I believed any of it, but because I could see how convincing it might sound to neighbors who'd grown tired of the drama. All Karen had to do was recast herself as a victim of my supposed tech manipulation, and the tide could turn again. Leo, sitting cross-legged on the floor with his laptop, shook his head. "She's weaponizing the media now. Look at this, her GoFundMe hit 30 grand overnight. People are buying the story." Eleanor, perched in her usual chair at our kitchen table, slammed her cane against the floor. "People are sheep. They'll throw money at a wolf if it's wearing wool." But even as Eleanor vented, I noticed the way Leo's hands trembled slightly over the keyboard. He was only 13, but he understood the stakes better than most adults. And this wasn't just about me anymore. Karen had escalated to the national stage. If we didn't shut her down cleanly, her narrative would stain us forever. The twist came the next day. Gerald, the board president who'd been exposed in those leaked emails, called an emergency reconciliation session. The flyers said it was to heal the neighborhood and rebuild trust. But the moment I read the fine print, I knew it was something darker. The agenda wasn't about reforms or apologies. It was a vote, one last attempt to remove me from the HOA entirely. "They're doubling down," Leo muttered. "No," I corrected, my voice flat. "They're staging Karen's comeback by proxy." That evening, the clubhouse filled again, but this time it felt more like a battlefield than a meeting. Karen's absence hung heavy, but her presence was everywhere. Neighbors wearing Free Karen buttons, signs taped to the walls declaring support community unity. The air crackled with tension. Gerald called the meeting to order, voice quivering. "We are here tonight to decide the future of this community. To restore peace, we must remove the source of conflict. For the good of the neighborhood, I motion to remove." He didn't get to finish. I stood, holding up the folder of evidence we'd compiled, thicker now with every stunt, every forged notice, every broken window. "The source of conflict isn't me. It's the corruption you enabled." Murmurs rippled. Some neighbors shouted their support, others booed. The divide was raw and vicious. I pressed on, calm but sharp. "Karen is gone, but her grip remains because people like Gerald here let it happen. She wrote the script, but you played the parts. And now you want to finish the job she couldn't, forcing me out for daring to stand up to her." Gerald's face flushed. "That's a lie." Before he could continue, Eleanor rose, her voice slicing through the noise. "We've seen the proof. He showed us her emails, her fraud, her lies. And now you want to vote him out? You're not protecting the neighborhood, you're protecting yourselves." Cheers erupted. The tension cracked. But just as the momentum swung my way, the final twist landed. The back doors slammed open, and in walked Karen's lawyer with a court order in hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, voice booming, "this meeting is invalid. My client has filed for an injunction against the HOA. Any vote taken tonight will be challenged in court. Furthermore, we have filed a defamation suit against this homeowner for damages exceeding $500,000. The room erupted in chaos. Neighbors gasped, some shouting in anger, others shrinking in fear. $500,000. Just the number was enough to terrify. Gerald, seizing the moment, shouted over the din, "You see? He's a liability. He's dragging us all into ruin." For a split second I felt the weight of it crush me. But then I remembered the anonymous email, the evidence of collusion, the broken window with its taunt. Karen wanted me cornered, desperate, panicked. Instead, I straightened, raised my voice, and said, "Funny you should mention lawsuits. Because I filed one of my own today." The room went silent. I held up a copy of my filing, fresh from the county clerk that morning, naming Karen, Gerald, Tom, and the HOA itself in a countersuit for harassment, fraud, and property damage. The evidence attached was damning. The forged condemnation flags, the towing order, the vandalism. And most importantly, the leaked emails proving conspiracy. Leo, grinning, tapped his phone, and the projector lit up again. This time it showed a new piece of evidence. Security footage from last night, grainy but clear enough. Gerald himself, sneaking across my yard, hammering one of those fake condemnation flags into my soil. The room gasped as Gerald's face went pale. "Game over," I said simply. The effect was immediate. Neighbors who had wavered turned furious, their anger no longer aimed at me but at the board members who'd sold them out. Shouts filled the room, demands for resignations, threats of recall vote. Gerald sputtered, tried to deny it, but the footage was undeniable. Tom slumped in his chair, defeated. Diane, the board member who'd leaked the first set of emails, stood and announced she was resigning immediately to save what's left of this HOA's dignity. The vote to remove me never happened. Instead, the crowd demanded Gerald and Tom step down, their voices uniting in a roar. For the first time in months, the balance of power shifted away from fear and back toward reason. By the end of the night, Gerald and Tom had resigned in disgrace. The HOA voted to suspend Karen's membership indefinitely pending trial. And as I walked out of the clubhouse, neighbors who had once avoided my gaze now patted my back, thanked me for standing firm. But the war wasn't truly over. Karen still had her lawyer, her GoFundMe army, her narrative spinning in the media. She would fight in court, drag this battle as far as she could. Standing in the cool night air, Leo looked up at me. Did we win? I thought about the broken window, the anonymous threats, the months of manipulation. Then I thought about the neighbors finally cheering, Eleanor's triumphant smile, the look on Gerald's face when his lies crumbled. "We won tonight," I said quietly. "And sometimes that's enough." Eleanor tapped her cane against the pavement, eyes glinting. "And tomorrow?" I smiled faintly. "Tomorrow we keep receipt. Just in case Karen crawls back through another window." The three of us, me, my son, and the toughest 80-year-old in the neighborhood, walked home together under the streetlights. The battle had scarred us, yes, but it had also forged something stronger, a community that finally saw the truth. And as I closed the door behind us, plywood still covering the broken glass, I realized the final irony. Karen had wanted control so badly she'd tried to break me. But in the end, it was her obsession that shattered her empire, while all I had to do was stand my ground and wait for her to trip over her own lies. The war wasn't over. But the neighborhood had finally chosen side. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was fighting alone.